Hey there, Joe Dorenzo here. We're going to be exploring in this video my top 10 most influential albums during the period I was in high school and into college and studying up in LA. The years late 72 through about 1979. There will also be 5 honorable mentions and a favorite album cover. So here we go. The first album up is Electric Guitarist, John McLaughlin's 1978 LP, recorded with Carlos Santana, and any album that sports Billy Cobham, Jack DeJohnette, and Tony Williams would have got my attention, which it did. The songwriting on here is pretty amazing. Songs New York on My Mind, Friendship, and You Know with Jack Bruce. Also from 1978 is Keith Jarrett's beautiful album My Song. This features the drumming of Jan Christensen. This is the first album on the list from the ECM label with Paul Danielson and Jan Garbarek. This band was known as the Scandinavian Quartet. This album was incredibly popular when it came out. The legendary ECM sound on this recording is just amazing. It's almost impossible to convey the impact that Jaco's 1976 debut album had when it came out. Back in the days without social media, the only avenues for information back then was the album itself and the pages of Downbeat magazine. This album features the amazing drumming of Lenny White and Narada Michael Walden. The band I had at the time did a song off this recording called Used to Be a Cha-Cha, with an amazingly difficult piccolo part a friend of mine, Danny Heffernan, would perform. Another debut album from the same year is Pat Metheny's Bright Size Life. Also features Jaco Pastorius on bass and Bob Moses on drums. This is by far my favorite Pat Metheny album. It's a very spiritual album and one that really conveys his unique approach to the guitar. I've always enjoyed playing the title track from this album in bands with my piano buddy Tom Zink. This photo of Pat and I is from the Speaking of Now tour back in 2003 at the Beacon Theater in New York City. With this next LP, it should become evident to everyone that the ECM label was a huge influence on me back in those days, and still is today. Ralph Towner's Solstice from 1975 is one of the most ethereal albums I ever heard. It introduced me to Jan Garbarek, Eberhard Weber, and the aforementioned Jan Christensen. This was also the first album that I took note of the trademark ECM ride cymbal beat that was prevalent on so many of the recordings from that label in those days, with music that was a world away from bebop. This next album is from the rock section of the record store back in those days. It's One Size Fits All, 1975, Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. This is an absolute tour de force by drummer Chester Thompson, who I would see at the NAMM show occasionally. George Duke was quoted as saying that this band could play anything, and with this album they proved it. The drum track on Inca Roads should be studied by all drummers, and I think it would give Chester the crown of the king of the concert toms. On YouTube you can see live performances of this band at the Roxy Theater on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood. Album number 4, once again from the rock section, is Tower of Power's Back to Oakland, 1974. And by this time David Garibaldi had pretty much perfected his funky linear style that he's known throughout the world for. The drum track on Squib Cakes is essential listening to everyone interested in that style. It's amazing to think that David was just 28 years old when he recorded this album up in Seattle. Starting in the mid-70s, I would catch Tower of Power at the Roxy and the Golden Bear in Huntington Beach. After seeing an ad for this band in Downbeat magazine, went to the record store and bought my first Weather Report album, which happened to be Mysterious Traveler from 1974. And here I'm going to cheat a little bit and include the subsequent album Tailspinnin' from a year later. This featured drummers Ishmael Wilburn, Skip Hayden, and the late great Ndugu Chancellor. These two albums for me were so inspirational and influential. And Mysterious Traveler, for my money, is their masterpiece. Tailspinnin' has these incredible drum tracks by Ndugu Chancellor. It was the only album he played on. He was 23 years old when he did, which is amazing to think about. This is a photo of Ndugu and I at the NAMM show the last time I saw him. I was presenting a copy of my drum book, which he appears in. It was a real honor for me. The next LP is the first Herbie Hancock album I ever owned, and it introduced me to the drum legend Harvey Mason. Headhunters from 1973 was an absolute smash when it came out. Back in the day, everyone I knew owned this album, and in the high school jazz band I played in, we did a big band version of Chameleon. I saw this band in Portland, Oregon with Mike Clark on drums in 1975. It was one of the best concerts I ever went to. I can still remember listening for the first time to the first track of Light as a Feather from 1973. The music introduced me to Chick Corea and the Latin jazz drumming of Airto. It wasn't long after hearing this album for the first time that I was sitting in at jazz clubs, underage, and playing what is probably Chick's most famous song, entitled Spain. Like many, I started collecting everything that Chick Corea put out after this, including Leprechaun and My Spanish Heart, the album entitled Friends, which introduced me to the drumming of Steve Gadd. Chick is certainly one of the most influential musicians. I've been very fortunate to have seen him in concert many times over the years. I think back to June of 1979, the first Playboy Jazz Festival at the Hollywood Bowl, where Chick Corea and Herbie Hancock performed the piano duets, with the closing act for the festival being Weather Report, with Jaco Pastorius, Peter Erskine, Wayne Shorter, and Joe Zawinul. So here are the 5 honorable mentions I promised. We're going to start with Gary Burton's Passengers from 1977, with some amazing drumming by Danny Gottlieb. The next is my no-brainer, which is Tony Williams' Believe It from 1975. Pretty much essential for just about every drummer everywhere. The next is No Mystery, 1975, Return to Forever. Once again, Lenny White on drums. Just some amazing Chick Corea compositions on this album. Next album is an old favorite, The LA Express, featuring Tom Scott, with the late great John Guerin on drums. And last but not least, Jeff Lorber's Soft Space album from 1978 features drumming by a great buddy of mine, Dennis Bradford. Which brings us finally to my favorite album cover, just a simple photograph, the Jack Bruce album, Things We Like. This features John McLaughlin on guitar, so it's a connection with the first album we started with. Just a simple photograph, nothing too pretentious. A guy in the park with his sports car, his dogs, a plate of sausages and grits, and what could be more cool than that? Finally, I want to acknowledge the 2 drum teachers I had back in the day. First, there's my great buddy Les DeMerle and the venerable Peter Erskine. I used to drive up to Vermont Avenue in LA to the Cellar Theater, take lessons with Les. And with Peter, it was up to the San Fernando Valley, a little house in Encino during his Weather Report days. Well, that's it. Thanks for watching. I hope you'll follow me over at Instagram and Twitter at Joe DiRenzo. You can visit my website, joedirenzo.com. See you next time.